there, everybody, and welcome back. Today we are reading Swamp Thing number 5, and just a little catch up on what happened in the last issue. Swamp Thing, Abby, and Matt Cable crash landed in Scotland, and they ended up being rescued, but unfortunately, it was by a family who had a secret, and that secret was their son was a werewolf, and they were going to use Abby and Matt to cure the son of his werewolfism by using a blood transfusion and basically giving them the son's curse and putting their clean blood into the son, which would hopefully have cured him. But in the end, Swamp Thing saved Abby and Matt from this couple, and of course he had to fight the son who became a werewolf at the end as well. So a big epic fight, and at the end, the werewolf was killed. But even though Swamp Thing saved Abby and Matt's life, Matt still pledged that he would get the Swamp Thing someday because the Swamp Thing killed his friends Alec and Linda. And that is where we left off on the last issue. So first things first, with issue 5, we got the cover here. We see Swamp Thing fighting a bunch of men who have torches and pitchforks, and they are surrounding him as in the background, it looks like a woman is being burned alive at the stake or just tied to a tree. And this issue was written by Len Wein with art by Bernie Wrightson. And we start off on the first page and we see the name of this issue is The Last of the Ravenwind Witches. And we get a pretty funny opening scene on the first page, and that is Swamp Thing being confronted on some sort of boat. Apparently, he has been pretending to be a human, and the way he does that, which I'm not sure how this is convincing, but he puts a long trench coat on and a wide-brim hat, and that apparently has kept most people from noticing that he is a big green monster. That is until these crew members saw him, and now he is revealing himself to them, and the narration is saying, "It was Larrabee on the night watch who first noticed the stowaway leaning on the guardrail, his topcoat bundled tightly against the brisk pre-dawn chill. A biggin, thought Larrabee, as he quietly gathered the crew. He's liable to give us trouble." Larrabee was a master of understatement. And we see one of the 4 men that is surrounding Swamp Thing with weapons is yelling out, "Help! Help! We've got a monster on deck!" And as Swamp Thing sees his attackers coming, he removes his overcoat and hat and reveals that he is in fact Swamp Thing, and he thinks to himself, "They've discovered me. This topcoat won't help me now. It was foolish to come out of hiding. If only that hold hadn't been so cramped. Now I'll have to pay for wanting to stretch my limbs." So the men are getting closer with their weapons, and one of them comes close with a spear, and he says, "Don't know where you came from, monster, but you'll not jinx this ship. We'll send you back to the arms of Neptune first." And then he stabs Swamp Thing as hard as he can into the abdomen, and we get a big chunk sound. And then he realizes that it doesn't do anything, so he lets go of the spear in fear, and he says, "Miss Sainted Mother, the gaff didn't even bother him." And in front of everybody, Swamp Thing just slowly grabs the gaff and pulls it out of his chest, and he thinks to himself, "You're wrong, my friend. It bothered me, all right. In fact, you bother me." So he picks the man who stabbed him up by his jacket, and he throws that man into the other men that are waiting to attack. And he thinks, "But you're not worth bothering about in turn, so why not just leave me alone?" But they won't leave me alone, not now. My chances of survival are better if I swim the rest of the way. So instead of continuing the fight, Swamp Thing just jumps over the railing and falls into the water, and once he gets in, he continues his thoughts thinking, "But not much better. These waters are cold, freezing. They're numbing my reflexes." And while he's getting cold and numb, Swamp Thing starts to think back exactly how he got from Macabre Manor to this boat. And the narration says, "But not your memories, Swamp Thing. No, the biting cold only strengthens them. Cold had followed you through that night, as you shambled through the woodlands surrounding Manor Macabre, to discover the squire's supposedly missing horse and wagon securely hidden in the mists. Cold lurked at your shoulder as you scrambled into the ancient carriage and urged the frightened steed onwards towards civilizations. Cold whipped wildly around you when at last you reached your destination and stood atop the wind-swept hillock in the hours before dawn. Cold ripped in on the tide when you located transportation away from that small Scottish port town. Cold stood laughing at your side as you assumed the guise of a man once more to gain passage aboard that battered old cargo ship, and cold had trembled up your spine as you silently accomplished your charade. And under each of these little narrations about being cold, we're seeing the different scenes. So we're seeing him find the carriage, ride the horse, look over a town, get to the docks of that town, and then put on a large overcoat and his wide-brimmed hat to pretend to be human, and then just walk on board, and no one really noticed. And the narration continues. Cold has been your fond companion, Swamp Thing. Even now, it stays faithfully with you, as your semi-conscious, moss-caked form drifts from the random tides, until a hauntingly familiar tumult disturbs your mock serenity. So it seems like the water is beginning to get more choppy, and Swamp Thing is kind of awoken from his thoughts, and he thinks to himself, Surf, the tide has carried me to a shore. I must start swimming again before. But he is cut off by a giant wave that begins to push him towards a rock face on the shoreline. And as the wave breaks, it's about to smash him into the rocks, and he thinks, it's too late. I'm caught in the current. These breakers will smash me against the rocks like a brittle. There's no hope of fighting it. And he is correct. Swamp Thing is strong, but not as strong as the ocean, and it just throws him directly into a rock face. And then we cut to a white woman and boy who are running in the woods, and the woman has raven black hair, and she's wearing a purple dress, and the boy has blonde hair and a billowy white shirt with blue trousers. And the narration over this panel running says, but the eternal pounding of nature's briny wonder is only a rumbling whisper to the two breathless figures who race desperately through the nearby shadowed woods. And the woman is saying, faster, brother, faster! Gideon and the others will soon be upon us. And as they run, the brother replies, but I'm so tired of running, sister, and my feet are beginning to hurt. And as the boy runs, he looks and he sees a cave off to his right, and he says, oh look, a secret cave. We can hide in there, and the baboon will never find us. And his sister replies, perhaps, it's a chance. So the two run into the cave, and they hide out while they watch, looking out from the mouth of the cave. And as they do, they see a group of men with pitchforks and sickles walk by the front of the cave. And the boy says, see, sister, I told you, they'll never find us, never. But his sister cuts him off saying, hush, child, not a sound. If they hear us, we're doomed. And just as she says that last word, doomed, she hears a noise behind her, and it's someone moaning, saying, ugh. And as they turn around to see what the noise is, we see Swamp Thing rise from the water in the back of this cave. He sees the two people, and he kind of doesn't believe that they're really there, and he thinks to himself, the rocks, the surf, battered me mercilessly, and now I'm seeing visions, but visions can't help me. And then he falls down with a thud right in front of the sister and brother. So while he is passed out, he has a vision of him when he was human with his wife Linda, and basically we just get a recap of the origin story of Swamp Thing, and this is here just to get the new readers who might have jumped on later on after issue 1 caught up with Swamp Thing's origin story. And his origin story is so horrific to him that it actually wakes him up. And as he pushes himself up off the ground, he sees that he is not alone. He is with the girl and her brother. And he thinks to himself, what? The girl? Then she wasn't a vision. And surprisingly, the woman is not scared of Swamp Thing. And she actually speaks to him saying, I can see bewilderment in your eyes, my strange friend. But you needn't be alarmed. We're really quite safe here. My name is Rebecca Ravenwind. My brother is called Timothy. We've been hiding here to escape a man named Gideon and his followers. You see, they think I'm a witch. That isn't true, of course. I really only tend to a small farm and care for my brother. He's a little, simple, you might say. And the Swamp Thing stands up. She begins to walk with him and says, Gideon should be gone by now, and Timothy and I must find our way away from here. Goodbye, my strange silent friend. May it be well with you. So Rebecca and Timothy leave the mouth of the cave, and as they walk away, Swamp Thing thinks, no, Rebecca, not goodbye. Not until I repay the debt I owe you. You looked after me when I needed help. Now it's my turn to look after you. So Swamp Thing actually follows them and then decides to walk with them as they walk through the woods. And as he does, the narration says, the moss-wet monstrosity shambles into step behind the fugitive siblings, but they hardly seem to notice. Yet their pace slows slightly till the creature has gained their side, and a sudden sparkle lights a fire in Rebecca's eyes. They move through the underbrush silently, this startling trio, for they know any sharp sound may alert their pursuers. And right as the narration says that, Swamp Thing steps down on a stick and it snaps. And we get a panel of the men that were chasing Rebecca and Timothy turn around all of a sudden because they hear that snap, and the leader says, "Over there, lads, we found him." So the men begin chasing them, and they chase Swamp Thing and Timothy and Rebecca all the way onto a cliff edge. And the narration says, "The clamor of the approaching mob reaches moss-encrusted ears as the Swamp Thing thrusts his companions before him and runs desperately through an unknown woodland until there is nowhere left to run. And Swamp Thing thinks, I blew it. There's no place to go from here but down." So him, Rebecca, and Timothy are on the cliff's edge, and we see the leader of these men, who I guess is Gideon, say, "There they be, lads, we've got them now." And as the men approach, of course, they see Swamp Thing, and they assume that this woman who they think is a witch has conjured a monster to fight them. So the lead man, who is Gideon, says, "Look for yourselves, lads. She be a witch, by thunder. She summoned up a thing from hell to protect her from our righteous wrath." And then a man steps forward, and he is the one brandishing the sickle, and he looks pretty beefy, and he intends to fight that monster. And he says as he approaches, "Well, no spawn of Satan will protect that little vixen from Jocko, boys." So this Jocko just walks up to Swamp Thing and kind of goes toe-to-toe, squares off with him, and Swamp Thing thinks, "I don't want to hurt you, Jocko, but if you don't put down that scythe, I'm going to." But Jocko makes the first move and actually swings the butt end of the scythe up, so he smacks Swamp Thing in the face with the wood part of it. And Jocko yells out, "No, demon, you won't lay your filthy hands on me. In fact, I'll fix it so you don't lay those hands on anybody ever again." And with all his might, Jocko swings the scythe, and Swamp Thing reaches out to block the blade, and it cuts straight through his arm, and he actually is able to cut off Swamp Thing's left arm. And Swamp Thing is horrified by this. He's never lost any of his limbs before. Sure, he fought a werewolf that was scratching him and stuff, but he's never actually lost a full appendage like this. So he thinks to himself, "Dear Lord, he cut off my arm, and I didn't even feel it." And Jocko looks on this scene pleasingly. He's probably thinking Swamp Thing is scared of him, but Swamp Thing's just thinking, wow, that didn't hurt at all. So Jocko yells out, "There, demon, how will you spread your evil now?" And then Swamp Thing stands up straight and approaches Jocko, even with one arm, and thinks, "Evil? I'll show you evil, Jocko. When you wake up, take a good look in the mirror. You'll see all the evil you can stand." And I'm not sure exactly what that means, but he grabs Jocko by the face with his one good arm and does something. I don't know what he does, but Jocko in the next page is definitely passed out. And the other men see this, and I guess Jocko is probably the biggest one of them and the most fearless. And so Gideon yells out, "Jocko has failed us, lads, but do not lose heart. We are not beaten yet. Now, Smith, throw your lantern." So Smith throws a lantern at Swamp Thing, and it crashes at Swamp Thing's feet, and the ground around Swamp Thing bursts into flames, and Gideon yells, "We will consign the demon to the flames from whence it was summoned." And Swamp Thing's a little confused just as the fire breaks out. He thinks, "Fools, what are they doing?" But as the flames kind of spread and get bigger, Swamp Thing realizes he might be in trouble, and the narration says, "The man-monster's answer is a raging wall of fire that springs to life before him, filling the air with acrid smoke, blistering heat, and more, much more. Memories. The painful image of a tortured Alec Holland ripples in the swiftly moving flames, and in that instant, the Swamp Thing recalls the agony of the unclassified chemicals seeping into his flesh, and in horror, he takes a single step backwards, a single fatal step." So right here is the first time I believe we find out that Swamp Thing is really afraid of fire, which makes sense because that's how he died. But this is enough to make Swamp Thing back up to the very edge of this cliff, and he starts feeling the ground and the rock beneath him shift, and he thinks, "Huh? The cliff edge, crumbling under my weight." And just as he thinks that, the whole edge breaks off, and Swamp Thing falls, and he thinks, "Falling into the sea again, and this time I may not survive." And we don't see Swamp Thing land, so we cut to Gideon and his men surrounding and grabbing Rebecca and Timothy. And now that they've been captured, Gideon says, "Your hellborn servant is gone, Rebecca Ravenwind. There is nothing keeping you from us now. Take them to the village, lads, and let justice be done." So Gideon and his men take Rebecca and Timothy back to the village, and we actually see the village, and we find out that this is in fact Divinity, Maine, and the narration says, "Founded circa 1648. Population, 97 good God-fearing people. principal industry, scrabbling for an existence, principal produce, ignorance and fear. So as the men bring Rebecca and Timothy to the courthouse, Rebecca is trying to break free, and Gideon says to her, "Stop struggling, witch. It will do you no good. There is no place you can run, no place you can hide, that we'd not find you again. Smith, put the boy in a good strong cell. He can be dealt with later. It's his accused sister who's our problem." So the men take Timothy away, and Rebecca yells out, "Timothy!" And as Timothy is pulled away, he says, "It's all right, Rebecca. Don't worry. Our friend will help us. You'll see, everything will be fine again. Just fine." And as Timothy is put into a cell, Gideon says to his men, "Come on, lads. Let's get the witch to court. She's entitled to a trial before we burn her at the stake." And as we turn the page, we see inside the courthouse they have tied Rebecca down with chains to the floor in the center of the room, and she is standing before a jury as Gideon is, prosecuting her. And the narration says, "Court, another word for a dust-strewn old chamber that has not been put to use in twice a score of years. For crime is no problem to the people of divinity. No ordinary crime, at least." So Gideon speaks to the jury saying, "Citizens, you see before you Rebecca Ravenwind, the last of a family of hellish necromancers who've troubled our village since it was first settled. I present her to you to be judged as you see fit." And then Gideon moves from talking to the jury to sit down as the presiding judge. So apparently he's not only the prosecutor, but he's also the judge. And he says, "This woman stands accused of unholy acts, of crimes against man and God. Is there any of you who will take the stand to put the lie to these charges or to support them?" So we get some evidence from the people, and I put evidence in quotation marks, because these are basically just random villagers that don't like Rebecca and her family. So the first one says, "She's a strange one, all right. Never joins in community functions. Keeps to herself, like she was too good for us." And we even see Gideon leading the witness saying, "And you've seen her talk to animals? Actually converse with them? Doesn't that seem a trifle odd to you?" And these are actually different scenes. So there's the one witness, and then we cut to another witness and another one. So the last witness is an old woman who's saying, "It's her blasted garden. Grows like 'twas Eden itself. And me, unable to even raise a weed. 'Tis witchcraft, I tell you." And as the last witness finished, Gideon actually gives his own witness to her witchcraft, and he says, "But her sins against my family are the greatest, my friends. For when my one-legged ancestor condemned the first Ravenwind to the stake, she swore that all the Gideons to follow would suffer the same affliction. And it's been a one-legged Gideon who's watched a Ravenwind consigned to the ashes ever since." And with this revelation, we get a little panel of Gideon's ancestors burning a ancestor of Rebecca. And I don't think I described Gideon before, so I will now because it's kind of important. He's just a middle-aged white guy with big mutton chops, and the lower half of his left leg is missing, so he walks on a peg leg on that one. So that is the curse he believes the Ravenwind witches have put on his family. So now that all the evidence has been given, Gideon gets very impassioned and steps down from the judge's seat and begins to walk towards Rebecca and the jury again, and he says, "I stand before you now on a limb of whittled wood because of her family's sorcery, and I say to you, there must be an end to it, now and forever." And then Gideon walks towards a woman in the audience and he says, "The curse laid upon us must be put to rest before, give me the child, woman." And we see the woman that he's walking towards is holding a baby in her arms, and she says, "No, you mustn't." So Gideon just grabs the baby out of her arms and says, "Confound you, woman. I said hand me the child." And she yells out as he grabs the baby, "No, please, no." But he doesn't listen to her, and he grabs the baby from her arms, and then he walks over to the jury, and he opens the cloth that the baby is swaddled in, and he reveals the child to the jury. And I'm assuming that this is actually his child because the lower half of the baby's left leg is missing. And Gideon yells out at the jury, "There, people of divinity, do you need any further proof? Do you see what the Ravenwind witches has done to my son? What will it do to my son's son, and his son thereafter, unless we put a stop to it? With the death of Rebecca Ravenwind, the line is finished. The curse is forever broken." And then he turns around sharply and points directly at Rebecca and says, "With the evidence before you, is there any other verdict that you can give?" And with that, all the jurors stand up and begin to shout, "Guilty, burn her! Guilty, burn the witch!" Then we come back to the coastline where we see Swamp Thing is not dead. He's actually pulling himself out of the water and onto the rocky coastline. And we see that as he pulls himself out, he's actually pulling himself out with both arms. And he just lost his left one. So we see a new power from Swamp Thing. He's able to regenerate and grow limbs. So as he pulls himself out, he thinks, feel like a used sponge. So weak my arms can barely support me. My arms? So he looks down in surprise and sees that his left arm has returned, but it's not fully grown yet. It's just kind of weak and sickly looking. So as he examines it, he thinks, Dear Lord, my severed arm has begun to grow back. The biorestorative formula in my system, in the lab, it causes rapid regeneration of plant life. And plant life is exactly what I've become. Amazing. My arm is reforming even as I watch it. So his sickly, weak-looking arm begins to actually grow muscular again, and it begins to fill out until it looks exactly like it did before, and his thoughts continue. Thicker, stronger, duplicating what I'd lost. Roots, moss, mingling together. Everything just as it was before. I'm whole again in a matter of minutes, and God, it feels good. Strength surging through my body. Strength to be put to use. For unless I miss my guess, there is a town nearby, and I have some unfinished business to attend to. And as Swamp Thing begins to walk back towards the town, we actually cut to the village, and we see Timmy, Rebecca's brother, is still in jail, and he's looking outside through the bars of his cell, and we see the local kids are making fun of him and taunting him through the bars from the outside. And the narration says, Boys will be boys, the tired old adage goes. The faces change from year to year, but the attitudes are constant. Boys are energetic, impressionable, mischievous. So one of the boys yells out to Timothy, Hey, my dad was right. This guy is a dope. And then another boy who's holding a glass bottle says, Just look at his face. He's off in dreamland somewhere. And then the kid with the bottle approaches Timothy's window even closer, and he says, My dad told me all about your sister, Pansy Face, and we're going to show her what happens to witches in this town, won't we, fellas? But what this kid didn't know is that while he was talking, all his buddies left because Swamp Thing comes out of the shadows and just stands around the kids, and then the kids see him and leave, except the one with the glass bottle, who was in front of the kids and didn't see Swamp Thing. So when he doesn't hear his friends agree with him, he turns around and he sees Swamp Thing standing right there behind him. And he drops the bottle immediately and just runs away. So Swamp Thing approaches the bars, and he doesn't talk to Timothy, but he does stare at Timothy through the bars and thinks to himself, It's all right, Timothy. I'm here now. I'll take care of you. I'll take care of everything. Stand away from the wall. And like I said, he was thinking that, so I'm not sure if Timothy actually picked that up or not. But as we turn the page, we see Swamp Thing is tearing the bars out of the wall from the outside, so all the rocks and everything are kind of falling outside instead of into the cell. And this panel where he's pulling the bars out is freaking awesome looking. He looks super buff. And as he does that, he thinks, And I'll get you out of that stinking hole. Your sister, Timothy, tell me, where have they taken her? And as Timothy walks out onto the rubble, he says to Swamp Thing, Thank you, friend. I knew you'd come back to help us. If we hurry, we can still save Rebecca. They've taken her to the hills beyond town to burn her. And upon hearing this, Swamp Thing just immediately turns around and begins running in the direction of where Rebecca's supposed to be. And he almost forgets Timothy because Timothy has to run after him saying, Hey, friend, wait for me. So Swamp Thing gets down on his knee and lifts Timothy up and onto his back so Timothy can just hang on to Swamp Thing's neck as he runs. And as he does this, Swamp Thing thinks, All right, boy, I won't go without you. She is your sister. Climb aboard and hang on tight. You're in for the piggyback ride of your life. Then we cut to the hilltop where the townsfolk have taken Rebecca and tied her to a tree, and Gideon is walking towards her with a torch, and he is about to light her on fire. And the narration says, The ragged hilltop stands a goodly distance away from fair divinity, far enough that the village air will not be tainted by crude threats and obscenities, or the odor of burning flesh. So as Gideon approaches her, he says, Rebecca Ravenwind, you have been tried and found guilty of the unholy crime of witchcraft, and so have been sentenced to the stake. Have you anything to say? And Rebecca cries out, Please, this is insanity. I'm innocent, Gideon. I've done nothing to you. You can't blame me for your family's genetic deformity. And at that, Gideon pulls her head back by her hair, and he yells at her, "Can't I, woman? The force that cripples the Gideons comes not from our maker, but from you, and you are the ones who shall pay for..." And then Gideon stops as he hears commotion behind him, and he turns and says, "Huh? That commotion. What is it?" And as he turns, he sees Swamp Thing standing with Timothy on a ledge that is overlooking all the people about to burn Rebecca, and Swamp Thing is thinking, "Found her, and just in time it appears." And as Gideon sees the Swamp Thing, he yells out, "Go ahead, woman, deny your wishhood now that you've summoned your demon spawn once more." And then he yells to his followers, "Get the beast, lads, destroy it. The Ravenwinds will not escape our justice this time." So all the men who were with him run at Swamp Thing and begin to attack him with all the instruments they have brought, like hoes and pitchforks and axes. And we see one of them stabs right into Swamp Thing's chest, but once again, it doesn't really do anything to him because it's just a plant. So as they attack, the narration says, "Pause for a moment and consider this scene. A great moss-encrusted behemoth struggling silently against half a score of wildly fanatic men. A ghastly Swamp Thing battling to save a life the fine and handsome townsfolk are desperate to take. Consider this scene and decide for yourself. Who is the real monster?" And when Gideon told his followers to attack, he did light the pyre that Rebecca was tied to, so the fire begins to grow around her as Swamp Thing battles with the townsfolk, and Rebecca seems pretty scared. Of course, she thinks she's going to die, and the narration says, "And across the barren field, the object of this conflict stares mutely at the searing flames that lick higher and higher about her, and the Swamp Thing battles on, unaware of the dire immediacy of Rebecca's plight, until a scream like shattered crystal lances the evening air, catching the attention of others as well." So under this narration, we see Swamp Thing is battling with the townsfolk, and at first he's struggling because all of them are jumping on him. But once he hears the scream from Rebecca, he stands up and easily smacks them away. And also we see that Timothy hears her scream and he gets worried. And still fighting off some of the men, Swamp Thing beelines towards Rebecca and he thinks, "Have to get her quickly before the fire can spread." And as Swamp Thing approaches the flames, Rebecca yells out to him, "No, my friend, go back. It's too late to save me." And as Swamp Thing approaches the fire, you can see he's kind of trying to figure out how to get to her because the flames are so big. And he thinks to himself, "That remains to be seen, Rebecca. If I can't go through the flames, maybe I can go around them." So the way the fire is situated, she is tied to the front of a tree, and the pyre that was lit that she was standing on was just kind of around the front of the tree with her. So Swamp Thing is able to walk around to the back of the tree, and he grabs it, and with all his might, he begins trying to pull the tree out of the ground. And he is successful. He just grabs that tree with Rebecca tied to it completely out of the ground, roots and all. And as he does this, he thinks to himself, "There'll be time to extinguish the blaze after I get Rebecca to safety." So Swamp Thing puts the tree behind him and then puts himself in between her and the crowd of people. We also see Timothy is run down and he is helping untie Rebecca from the tree. So as the people approach, Swamp Thing thinks, "Now, anyone who wants to get Rebecca will have to go through me, and I'll break anyone who..." But his thoughts are cut off as the untied Rebecca puts her hand on his shoulder and says, "It's all right, my faithful, silent friend. I'll take over now." And Swamp Thing turns and he sees Rebecca, and she is standing tall, and it looks like air is swirling all around her because her hair is blowing upwards along with her billowy dress. And Gideon sees this and says, "Hold, witch! Your evil must not escape this place." But Rebecca's not scared anymore. She says, "My evil? No, Gideon. You are the one who is truly evil here. Yours is the worst kind of evil, the kind that holds people in ignorance so that you can maintain power. You've smothered divinity, Gideon, as your family has for 300 years. And then in anger, Gideon throws a pitchfork at her, saying, "Liar! You'll die for that." And as the pitchfork flies through the air straight at Rebecca, she raises her hand and says, "No, Gideon, there's been enough death and divinity. It's time there was an end to it." And we see some light come from her hand and hit the pitchfork in midair, and the pitchfork completely melts and burns away. Then Rebecca begins to rise from the ground, and as she levitates, we see the weather starts to change, the clouds get black behind her, and lightning starts flashing in the sky. And the narration says, "Rebecca Ravenwind closes her limpid eyes, and the sky is filled with a storm. Great gouts of electrical fire leap across the black. The deafening peal of unearthly thunder shakes the very ground, and amid the tumult of that accursed madness, Gideon and his followers suddenly begin to scream. And we don't really see what happens to them as we turn the page, and it seems like the storm is subsiding down. And while that storm was going on, Swamp Thing wasn't really paying attention to the townspeople. He was just staring at what Rebecca was doing. And the narration continues. The screams fade to a whimper, then a sigh, and finally to silence. And the storm-tossed clouds seem to quiet in turn. Then we see Rebecca come to the ground as the storm quiets down. And as Swamp Thing watches her, he thinks, I've heard of sudden storms before, but this one was ridiculous. And Timothy, who's standing next to his sister, says, See, sister, I told you everything would be fine. Those bad men will never bother us again. And we see Rebecca is holding her head like maybe she has a headache or that using those powers took a lot out of her. So Swamp Thing finally turns around to see what the people of the village were going to do next. And as he turns, all he sees is a field of flowers that has grown exactly where the villagers were. And he puts two and two together and he thinks, Good Lord, they've all been turned into flowers. Then Rebecca is. But his thoughts are cut off by Rebecca finishing his thoughts, like she can actually hear him. And she says, A witch. That's what you're thinking I am, isn't it, my friend? Well, I'm not, you know. I didn't lie to you. The power's not mine. It's Timothy's. And then we see Timothy walking amongst the flowers, and he's picking some of them. And as Rebecca and Swamp Thing watch him, Rebecca continues, I'm what you would call his familiar, the object he focuses his power through. He's so harmless, I don't mind it, really. All he ever conjures up is flowers. Then she walks over to Timothy as she still talks to Swamp Thing, saying, Now, my dear friend, I'm afraid we must leave you. We have friends in Boston who will take care of us. We need not burden you. Goodbye, and God be with you. And this whole time she's been talking, Swamp Thing has been silent, just staring at her. And I like to imagine that he is just kind of horrified that her and her brother have just murdered every man in that town that came to kill them. So there's probably a good chunk of everybody in the village. And yeah, they weren't good people, but turning them into flowers is pretty messed up. So as they walk away, he thinks, And may he be with you, Rebecca. Your trials are over. Gideon was a fanatic, short-sighted, narrow-minded, and he has paid the price. Nobody ever said the last of the Ravenwind witches had to be a girl. Then we cut to nighttime, and the caption says, Addendum, countless miles away on a moonlit New England porch. And we see standing on a porch there are two people, a man and a woman, and they're in shadows, so we're only seeing their silhouettes. And the man is saying, The air is so crisp you can almost hear it crackle. I didn't think they made nights like this anymore. And the woman replies, They don't. What you're experiencing is a manifestation of your most secret desires. And then we cut to a panel where we're a little bit closer, where we can see them a little bit better, but their faces are still in shadow, but they definitely look like they resemble a couple people we've seen before. They look like they resemble Alec and Linda Holland. And we see the man say, Honey, my most secret desires have nothing to do with the weather. And the woman replies, If you mean what I think you mean, sir, you should be ashamed. Then in the last panel of the comic, we finally get a full reveal of these people, and they are in fact Alec and Linda Holland, or at least they look like them. And we see the Alec say, Oh, I'm ashamed, Linda, darling. I most certainly am. And Alec puts his hand around her, and she kind of bashfully says, Oh, you silly. I just don't know what I'm going to do with you, Dr. Alec Holland. So we seem to have confirmation that these two, while not only looking like Alec and Linda, are actually Alec and Linda because they're calling each other that. But unfortunately, we will have to wait till next issue to find out how that's possible. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains.and-comicbooks, all one word, @gmail.com. And remember, until next time, stay swampy.